Hello and welcome to another video. This one is going to be covering an introduction to the liturgical year. This is actually just based on a book by that exact same name, and you'll recognize it by this image being on the cover. So I just took their image and took some of their content. I'm just going to kind of summarize some of the points there. And this is going to be kind of an intro to my series this year where I'm going to be going through the ancient Christian devotional week by week in the liturgical year. So this just help us set up for what the liturgical year even is, because I'm assuming that a lot of you probably don't know, unless you're from a higher church background like Catholicism or Anglicanism. But a lot of my friends are from low church traditions like Pentecostal holiness or Foursquare or things like that. So just not as familiar with liturgy or the liturgical year. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So what even is liturgy? So what do we mean by that? Well, an example that we can use for this is music. So if we think about a work of music like Beethoven's Quartet Number 12. The work, we have here kind of our musical notation for everything so that you can see what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. The performance itself is distinct from the work. The score is this, list of notes and everything like that gives us the specific instructions on how to play. And then the script is all of the necessary musical notations for the performance, including culturally assumed standards. And so all of these things could be considered um, Beethoven's quartet, right? The performance itself could be considered that. The score could be considered that. The script could be considered that. All of those things could be referred to as Beethoven's Quartet Number 12. So that's kind of conceptually similar to what we mean when we say liturgy. We could say the work is Anglican worship. The performance of that would be any given Sunday where you're at an Anglican church and you're going through the liturgy of the Anglican church. The score, the instruction, so to speak, would be the Book of Common Prayer. The script would be additional notations for clarity as well as culturally assumed standards. And so when we say liturgy, we could mean any of these things or all of these things together. But ultimately, what liturgy is it's what allows us to worship together. For more low church tradition people, I grew up learning that God's good all the time, and all the time God's good. Right, that kind of call and response. That's sort of liturgy, right? It's I know what to say, and you know what to say in response to it. So, extending beyond that, just that one service, though, the historical church has developed a liturgical calendar. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today, not just liturgy itself, but the actual liturgical calendar. So, what do we mean by the liturgical calendar? Well, a lot of times this will be referred to as the time of the Lord. The liturgical calendar starts with Advent. Advent, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in just a second, but Advent leads up to Christmas. And then there's some specific Christmas time. And then there's something called ordinary time that actually happens a couple of times during the year. And then there's Lent, and then Holy Week and Easter. And so this is the liturgical year. This is the liturgical calendar. So every year you start with Advent, leading up to Christmas. You go into ordinary time. You do Lent, Holy Week, and Easter, and then you go back into ordinary time, and then you go to Advent again. And there's some other things, kind of peppered in there, but those are the big kind of tent pegs for the liturgical year. So Advent. This is another image from the book that I mentioned, Introduction to the Liturgical Year. I love this image, by the way, because we have over here kind of an artistic representation of the Trinity. You've got God, the Father, and coming out of him is his word, and his word is, of course, Jesus, but his word is also his breath, and his breath is the Spirit. Right, so I just really enjoy this liturgical representation, or this artistic representation of the Trinity. But in addition to that, we also have this frame of a serpent, or kind of a dragon because of the wings here. And down in the corner, you have Adam and Eve. And this dragon serpent coming over here, its head is being crushed under the foot of Jesus, right? And this is Mary, and this is Jesus, and so I appreciate that this is the Trinity, but also represent artistic representation of the gospel, right? Because the serpent in the garden is the dragon in Revelation, and in Genesis 3:15. In the curse to Adam and Eve, God says, "I'll put enmity between your seed and her seed, and you will bruise his heel, and he will crush your head." And so that's what's happening here, right? That's Genesis 3:15. So Advent, what we have here during this part of the liturgical year, the eyes and hearts of all Christians are fixed on Jesus, who has once for all entered into time and illuminated it. Filling it with his grace, he draws us continually and fills us with desire. And this is a direct quote from the book, his quotation marks. Advent is celebrated during the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. It reminds us not only that Jesus came, but also that he will come again. So that's the purpose of Advent, is sort of to orient us towards Christmas, to orient us towards Jesus' coming. Advent itself is from the Latin word adventus, which means arrival or coming. And so this is to orient us towards Jesus' arrival, his coming. Um, Sort of the elements of Advent, thematic elements that are going to be present there are going to be that Jesus will come to judge. There's a vigilant anticipation of him. He's the promised Redeemer. He's the tree of Jesse, coming from Genesis. He's the son of David. He's also the son of Abraham. This provides for us hope in exile and tribulation. He's foretold by the prophets, awaited by the just. And there's usually going to be some interaction with Zechariah and Elizabeth, John the Baptist's parents, and some interaction with Mary and Joseph, obviously, right? And then visitation from John the Baptist. We'll talk about that a little bit more in another video, because there's a painting of that I really enjoy, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that sort of interaction. The Christmas season following then on that is from the first Vespers of the Nativity up to the celebration of Jesus' baptism. First Vespers comes from a Latin word again, the Latin word meaning evening, and so Vespers is just evening prayer uh, in the liturgical calendar. So the first evening prayer of the Nativity up to the celebration of Jesus' baptism. During this time, we celebrate the birth of Christ, celebrate the Holy Family, the solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God, and the visit of the Magi. Now, that statement, Mother of God, there, that may tweak some people, depending on how historically informed you are there. Well, what we're saying here by saying that Mary is the Mother of God, we're not saying that Mary gave birth to God in the sense that God did not exist prior to Mary. That obviously would be absurd. This is a historical confession that's actually has more to do with Jesus than it does to do with Mary, saying that she's the mother of God. This comes from Ephesus, the Council of Ephesus in 431, where uh, the theologians there were debating, um, should we say the one who experienced birth, that one is God? Or should we say that the one who experienced birth is Christ? And what they're getting at here with Jesus is when Jesus experiences birth, is his divinity experiencing birth? Should we say that person who experiences birth is truly divine in every possible way, and his divinity is experiencing birth? Or another way of putting this is, can we say that God knows what it's like to be born? So that's what Ephesus is getting at, and that they conclude that we should refer to Mary not as Christotokos, the bearer of Christ, because she's not just the bearer of Christ; she's the bearer of God, the one to whom she gives birth. That one can properly be called God, and so Jesus truly experiences God. Truly experiences being born. God knows what it's like to be born. And this is important because we can apply that same logic to the cross. If God doesn't know what it's like to be born, then God didn't die for you. Um, if God doesn't know what it's like to be born, then God doesn't know what it's like to die, right? And so, in the person of Jesus, God experiences birth. Now, he does so with respect to the humanity of Jesus, not with respect to the divinity, but we're getting ahead of myself here, and we can talk about all that uh, later. But just to say here that it is appropriate, even from a Protestant perspective, to refer to Mary as the Mother of God, um, because she is the one who gave birth to Jesus, and Jesus can rightly be called God. And so she has given birth to God. God knows what it's like to be born um, in in the person of Jesus. So during this time, we also celebrate the visit of the Magi. This is actually the 12 days of Christmas. Goes from Christmas until January 6th. January 6th is Epiphany, which is traditionally when the Magi come, and so that's what the 12 days of Christmas are. Right, Christmas doesn't end at Christmas. Christmas ends January 6th at Epiphany. So this is why you'll see sometimes people will share memes that say things like the tree stays up until Epiphany, and that kind of thing because Christmas isn't over until Epiphany. So also during this time, uh, Stephen, the first martyr, is honored alongside the babies slaughtered by Herod. And so, we want to remember that, especially with the babies slaughtered by Herod, that the advent of Jesus um, has martyrs connected to it, right? And there are people that have died because of Jesus. Um, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. The family of Jesus is celebrated after we celebrate Jesus's birth, and it's appropriate to celebrate the family of Jesus, um, not in a sense that we're worshiping them or anything like that. Again, from a Protestant perspective, I'm not Catholic, um, Protestant, but it's these celebrations are intended to remind us of who these people are and what they've done in the faith, right? Um, and what they've done for us. And Joseph, in particular, is a pretty noteworthy figure that I think doesn't get a lot of love. That that really is a shame because he could have divorced Mary, shamed Mary, and kept her money. Um, because they're betrothed, and so he would have already gotten a bride price. Um, and if he has a suspicion that she has cheated on him, you know, then he could have exposed her publicly, shamed her, and kept the money. But the scriptures say, even before the angels come to him, that he had intended to divorce her quietly, which what that means is that Joseph finds out that she has cheated on him, or at least in his mind, that's what's happened. Um, and his response to that isn't to shame her, his response to that is to protect her. Um, so likely what he's thinking is if she's been with someone else, then I'm going to provide for her an opportunity to be with that person without being shamed. And so I'm not going to tell anybody what's happened. I'm going to divorce her quietly, and then she can receive the bride price back, and then she can, in an honorable way, be married to somebody else. And so, I think that sort of thing is worthy of celebration, right? The day of the Solemnity of Mary, which is a celebration for Mary just on her own, is also the eighth day from Jesus' birth, also sometimes called the octave of Christmas. So this would be the day that he would be presented to the temple and circumcised and held by Simeon. Epiphany is celebrated 12 days after Christmas. This is, like I said, the 12 days of Christmas, which is a traditional amount of time it took for the Magi to find Jesus. Epiphany means revelation or manifestation, and it refers to Jesus' manifesting himself to the Gentile Magi. The baptism of the Lord is celebrated on the Sunday after Epiphany in the West, and usually with Epiphany in the East, usually called Theophany. There are some distinctions in the liturgical year between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, but more or less there's a pretty good alignment. This aligns with Epiphany because it's another instance of Jesus being manifested. After this celebration is ordinary time, which begins and lasts until Lent. Um, Ordinary time does not refer to it being boring or typical. Rather, it indicates that it is ordered. Ordinary time happens twice a year between Epiphany and Lent, and then again after from Pentecost until Advent. There are three significant feasts called solemnities that are during ordinary time. These three feasts are Trinity Sunday, which is specifically reserved time to celebrate the Trinity. Obviously, we celebrate the Trinity every day, but the specific day for celebrating the Trinity. Then Corpus Christi, which is Latin for the body of Christ, focuses on communion. This is the first Sunday after Trinity Sunday. And then Christ the King. This marks the end of the liturgical year, celebrating the coming rule and reign of Christ. And this occurs the Sunday before the first Advent Sunday. After that first section of ordinary time, we have Lent. Lent begins with Ash Wednesday, which is 46 days before Easter. Lent is a time of austerity during which fasting of some sort occurs for 40 days. It's a time of recommitment to being true disciples of Jesus. During this time, Christians should ask God to convict them and fill them anew with His Spirit. The idea here, this starts really early on in church history, um, with baptisms typically being done on Easter Sunday. And very early on, that kind of becomes the standard for when you're going to get baptized. And prior to baptism, there's this standard that you're going to fast leading up to your baptism. And then that starts to expand to the person doing the baptism and the people observing the baptism. Actually, we see this in the Didache, um, or sometimes pronounced Didache, or a very bunch of other ways. Um, and this talks about when you're being baptized, how long you should fast and how long other people should fast, and that sort of thing. And so that eventually expands into Lent, which is everybody fasting leading up to Easter. And you know, for whatever reason, I'm not exactly sure when this happens in church history, we stop doing baptisms just on Easter. And so Lent started because it was leading up to baptism on Easter Sunday, and now it's just leading up to Easter Sunday, which is fine. Just it's odd that it was anchored to baptism and the baptism was anchored to Easter, and somehow baptism got removed from that. So, um, Holy Week, Jesus enters Jerusalem triumphantly, is welcomed as a conquering king. Obviously, this isn't going to last. Mary of Bethany anoints Jesus's feet, and Judas is not a fan of that, which kind of confronts us with which one of these would we be. Jesus shares the Last Supper with his disciples, including Judas. Right. This includes washing his feet, knowing that he will betray Jesus. So that's another challenging thing to think through. Holy Week culminates in Good Friday and Holy Saturday. Another quote from the book that I'm kind of riffing off of here is, "This is the wood of the cross on which hung the Savior of the world. From the wood of the cross is come the joy of the whole world." A Holy Saturday should be spent in silence, remembering Jesus' stillness in the grave. No communion, baptism, etc., should be performed on this day. Just prayer. And Good Friday and Holy Saturday are when done properly, when that kind of somber approach to things, they're really moving, kind of forcing you to um, think through what's happening and think through what Jesus has done, and it really builds up for you the um, the gravity, so that your celebration on Easter is that much better. Um, it's worth saying here, by the way, that every Sunday is Easter. Really, the early church considers Sunday the day of the resurrection, and so every Sunday is a celebration of the resurrection. This is why even during liturgical year, even during Lent, when you're supposed to be fasting, you don't fast on Sunday, because Sunday is the celebration of the resurrection. And so you should never fast when you're celebrating the resurrection. And this is one thing that a lot of people don't pick up on when they do their Lenten fast, and I really think it's important, because it's important to remind yourself that even during dark times there are reasons to celebrate, um, and that's important. That's important to hold on to. Holy Saturday ends with the Easter Vigil. This is celebrated at night on Saturday before the light dawns. Traditionally, this is when baptism occurs, like I said before, and when converts are given their first communion. This is the most important feast of all of them. Um, and then we have Easter for 50 days leading up. Uh, to Pentecost, between Easter and Pentecost, the church celebrates Jesus' resurrection and his appearance to his followers. 40 days after Easter, the church celebrates Jesus' ascension into heaven. And the 50th day from Easter, Pentecost is celebrated, which is the outpouring of the Spirit. So this is kind of a basic idea of like what is the liturgical year and all of those sorts of things. The ancient Christian devotional that I'm going to be working through week by week is organized off of this year, and so each week will say first Sunday of Advent, second Sunday of Advent, third Sunday of Advent, etc. And so each video will talk about that briefly, and then we'll talk about some of what's going on that week in the liturgical calendar. So. Until next time, keep striving towards becoming an elephant.